For thousands of years, brave men have stared death in the face and put up a heroic last stand against overwhelming odds. In this video, we're going to be covering 3 of the most heroic last stands in history, in no particular order. In the wake of the French Revolution, France had been torn apart from the inside out. Come August 1792, the rebels controlled essentially all of France, except for the royal palace known as Tuileries, where the king had barricaded himself with his remaining followers. The defenders knew an attack was imminent for quite some time, and thus had been preparing for a battle, with some 5,000 men taking up defensive positions around the palace. The defenders were made up of gendarmes, National Guards, Chevaliers de Saint Louis, Royalist volunteers, and most notably 950 veteran members of the Swiss Guard. Unfortunately, for all their planning, the defenders had failed to take into account how little ammunition they had. A hard truth that would ultimately be their undoing. To make matters even worse, there was a lot of chaos in the ranks prior to the assault, with many gunners declaring that they would not fire on their brethren. The situation became critical when, prior to any shots being fired, the cowardly king abandoned the palace alongside his queen, who had previously urged him to stay and fight. Instead of trying to escape, however, the king merely handed himself to the rebels. The incentive for resistance predictably fell away with the king's departure. Many of gendarmerie left their posts crying "Vive la Nation," and the National Guard's inclination began to move towards the rebels. As one by one their French loyalist counterparts surrendered to the rebels, the Swiss Guard, although being surrounded on all sides at this point, and restricted to the interior of the building, as previously ordered by the king, refused to surrender, stating that, "We should think ourselves dishonoured. We are Swiss. The Swiss do not part with their arms, but with their lives. We think that we do not merit such an insult. If the regiment is no longer wanted, let it be legally discharged. But we will not leave our post, nor will we let our arms be taken from us." Shortly after this fierce response from the Swiss, the French threw everything they had at the palace. Louis, hearing the firing, wrote a letter ordering the Swiss Guard to lay down their arms at once and retire to their barracks. However, to obey this order in the midst of such heavy fighting would be a death sentence, and the Swiss officers in command did not immediately act upon it. However, despite their bravery, the Swiss Guard soon became overrun as their ammunition and men alike ran low. At some point, the main body of the Swiss Guards that still remained fell back through the palace and retreated under fire through the gardens at the rear of the building, where they were broken into smaller groups and slaughtered. Come the end of the battle, some 600 of the original 900 Swiss Guard had been slain either in the fighting or after they had surrendered. A further 160 died in prison of their wounds or were killed during the September massacres that followed. Apart from less than 100 of the Swiss Guard who escaped Tuileries, the only survivors were a 300-strong regiment which had been sent to Normandy to escort grain convoys a few days before the battle. Although their prowess has largely been forgotten, the Swiss Guards still live on, with a small detachment of them still protecting the Pope in the Vatican City to this day. No last stand video could be complete without mentioning the heroic last stand of the Battle of Saragarhi. Saragarhi was a small village in the border district of Kohat, situated on the Samana Range in present-day Pakistan. In 1897, a general uprising was sparked by the Afghans, and between the 27th of August and the 11th of September, many efforts were made by the Pashtun tribes to capture forts. However, none would prove successful. At least none until the famous Battle of Saragarhi. On the 12th of September 1897, at around 9 am, 6,000 to 10,000 Afghans reached the signalling post at Saragarhi, which was only being defended by 21 Sikh soldiers. Shortly after this, Gurmukh Singh signals to Colonel Horton, situated in Fort Lockhart, that they are under attack. Upon hearing this, Horton sends a signal back, stating that he cannot send immediate help to Saragarhi. These Sikh soldiers would be forgiven for giving up at this point and trying to escape with their lives. But no, it was at this point that the 21 Sikh soldiers in Saragarhi decided to fight to the last man to prevent the enemy from reaching the forts. Bhagwan Singh is the first Sikh soldier to be killed in the battle, and around the same time, Naik, which is the Indian and Pakistani word for corporal, Lal Singh is seriously wounded. After Bhagwan Singh's death, Lal Singh and Jiwa Singh carry his body into the inner layer of the post. Also, if you were wondering, these people weren't related. Singh is just a title or surname, which is adopted by certain warrior castes in northern India. At some point after this, the Afghans managed to break through a portion of the wall of the picket. Horton also signals to the Sikhs that he is estimated there are between 10,000 and 14,000 Pashtuns attacking Saragarhi. It was reported that around this time, the leaders of the Pashtun forces made promises to the soldiers attempting to get them to surrender, but these promises would be swiftly ignored. After 2 failed attempts to rush open the gate, the wall is eventually breached and some of the fiercest hand-to-hand fighting occurs in its wake. After the wall is breached, Havildar Ishar Singh orders his men to fall back into the inner layer whilst he bravely remains to cover the retreat. However, this attempted retreat is breached and all but one of the Sikh soldiers are killed. Gurmukh Singh, who communicated the battle to Horton, is the last remaining Sikh defender. His last message to Horton is for permission to pick up his rifle. Upon receiving permission, he packs up the heliograph and holds the door of his signalling shed. Reportedly, Horton could see Gurmukh Singh's last moments from Fort Lockhart through a window. Gurmukh would go on to kill 40 Afghans in his heroic last stand before the Pashtuns set fire to his post, which would ultimately be his undoing. As he was dying, he was said to have yelled repeatedly the Sikh battle cry of Bola So Nihal Sat Shri Akar, which translates to, "One will be blessed eternally who says that God is the ultimate truth." His death marked the end of the Sikhs' heroic last stand of the Battle of Saragarhi. All 21 of the Sikh officers and soldiers were posthumously awarded the Indian Order of Merit, which was the highest gallantry award which an Indian soldier could receive at the time. Although now gone, their heroic actions stand as a fierce reminder of the bravery and honour of the Sikh warriors of northern India. The Byzantine Empire was once a great power encompassing all of modern-day Turkey, Greece, Italy, Bulgaria, Albania, and Serbia, as well as parts of Egypt, Algeria, Spain, and Portugal. But come the mid-1450s, it was a shell of its former self due to the expansion of the Ottoman Empire and only controlled little more than the city of Constantinople itself. This last remnant of the once great empire was a pain in the side of the Ottomans, and they would stop at nothing to see the city of Constantinople fall into Ottoman hands. As tensions reached a boiling point and war seemed all but inevitable, the then emperor of the Byzantine Empire, Constantine XI, sought help from his fellow Christians to the north in an attempt to save his empire and city. However, no substantial help would come, and the Byzantine Empire and its emperor were left to face the Ottoman menace on their own. By the time the siege of this great city began, the Byzantines were predictably massively outnumbered, with estimates of their numbers ranging from 6,000 to 8,500. Compare this with the some 80,000 Ottoman soldiers besieging the city, you'd be forgiven for thinking it would be an easy Ottoman victory. But the Byzantines had one great advantage over their Ottoman counterparts, the city of Constantinople itself. The city was heavily fortified, and there was hope that the Byzantines could hold out long enough that their fellow Christians would change their minds and come to the aid of the once great empire. The siege would begin on the 6th of April 1453, and at first the Byzantines held strong, repelling all attempts to enter the city. As the siege progressed and supplies ran lower, however, the Byzantines realized they would not have enough men to defend both the sea walls and the land walls. Supplies ran so low in the city that many of the poorer residents began to starve due to the rise in food prices. However, on Constantine's orders, the Byzantine garrison collected money from churches, monasteries, and private residences to pay for food for the poorer citizens, which would fix the issue for the time being. Throughout the siege, the Ottomans continuously bombarded the city's outer walls and eventually managed to open up a small breach which exposed the inner defences. It was at this point that Constantine sent messages to the Sultan, pleading with him to withdraw from the city under the pretext that he would pay whatever amount of tribute he wanted. Sultan Mehmed, however, was determined to take this city and responded to the emperor's pleas with the following message: "Either I shall take this city, or the city will take me, dead or alive. If you will admit defeat and withdraw in peace, I shall give you the Peloponnese and other provinces for your brothers, and we shall be friends. If you persist in denying me peaceful entry into the city, I shall force my way in, and I shall slay you and all your nobles, and I shall slaughter the survivors and allow my troops to plunder at will. The city is all I want, even if it is empty. Under these circumstances, an ordinary emperor would simply give in to the Ottoman demands and live their days out in peace as a puppet ruler. Constantine XI, however, was no ordinary emperor, and was determined to save the city or fall with it. Upon hearing his companions and counselors plead for him to leave the city rather than die with it, it is said he responded to them with, "God forbid that I should live as an emperor without an empire. As my city falls, I fall with it. Whoever wishes to escape, let him save himself if he can, and whoever is ready to face death, let him follow me." Shortly after these words, he sent the last communication between the Byzantines and the Ottomans. The message he sent reads the following: "As to surrendering the city to you, it is not for me to decide or for anyone else of its citizens, for all of us have reached the mutual decision to die of our own free will, without any regard for our lives." On the 26th of May, the Ottomans held a war council where the Sultan actually contemplated abandoning the city due to its strong resistance. However, he would be swayed to continuing the siege. Without warning, the Ottomans began their final assault in the early hours of the 29th of May. Fighting-age men rushed to the walls to defend the city as the other men and women rushed to help the parts of the army stationed inside the city. Waves of Mehmed's troops charged at Constantinople's land walls, hammering at the weakest section for more than 2 hours. However, despite the relentless attack, the defense, led by Giustiniani and supported by the emperor himself, held firm. Unbeknownst to anyone, after 6 hours of fighting just before sunrise, Giustiniani, who was a Genoese captain who had come to the aid of Constantine, was mortally wounded. Constantine begged him to stay and continue fighting, allegedly saying, "My brother, fight bravely, do not forsake us in your distress. The salvation of the city depends on you. Return to your post. Where are you going?" Giustiniani was too weak, however, and his bodyguards carried him to the harbour and escaped the city on a Genoese ship where he would die of his wounds on his way home. The Genoese troops wavered when they saw their commander leave them, and though the Byzantine defenders, who made up the vast majority of the troops, fought on, the Ottomans soon gained control of both the outer and inner walls. About 50 Ottoman soldiers made it through one of the gates, Kirkaporta, and were the first of the enemy to enter Constantinople. Ascending up the tower above the Kirkaporta, they managed to raise an Ottoman flag above the wall. Following this, the Ottomans stormed through the wall and many of the defenders panicked with no means of escape. It is unclear exactly how Constantine fell, but it is known he died shortly after the Ottomans stormed the city, most likely fighting to his last breath. One account states that Giustiniani implored the emperor to escape as he was carried away, but Constantine refused and preferred to die with his empire. Constantine then dashed to where the fighting appeared to be the thickest and, as it would be unworthy of him to be captured alive, implored his officers to kill him. When none of them obeyed his command, Constantine threw off his imperial regalia as to not let himself be distinguished from the other soldiers and disappeared into the fray, sword in hand. Shortly thereafter, the emperor was dead, and with that, the city had officially fallen. Alright, so that's going to be it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. I did try to make it a little different than my other ones, so let me know if you enjoyed the new style. Also, if you had any suggestions for future videos, make sure to leave those in the comments. But, with all that being said, I hope you have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I'll see you guys in the next one.